Hello, second graders, and welcome to our math lesson for today. Our lesson today is going to be a review of chapters 11.7 through 11.11. So 11.11, which you guys did yesterday, was the last kind of lesson that we are going to be doing in chapter 11 for now. We are going to revisit chapter 11 and do 11.1 through 11.6 at the end of the school year. But for 11.7 to 11.11, we are pretty much done, and we're going to be moving on to money and time starting on Monday, I believe. So just wanted to do like a quick review of what we learned from 11.7 to 11.11, and then your little math assignment that you're going to be doing on Think Central today is going to be a review as well. So it's going to cover a lot of questions from those chapters. So I kind of just wanted to give you a quick review. And so the first lesson that we did was 11.7, which you can see right here on my screen and on your screen as well. And that lesson was about partitioning rectangles. And we were answering the essential question, how do you find the total number of same size squares that will cover our rectangle? And so if you remember, one of the activities that we did that was very, very important in this lesson was this one right here. So it says use color tiles to cover the rectangle and write how many. So this one was, again, remember it talked about rows and columns. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just show you quickly how to use the color tiles to cover the rectangle, and then I'm going to remind you the difference between the rows and the columns. So for this rectangle over here, I'm going to just put the red squares on one side, and I'm going to put blue squares on the other. Okay? And so if you remember, right, rows, from what I told you in the lesson for 11.7, rows go from side to side and columns go up and down. So right here we have one row and we have two rows. So the number of rows in this square or in this rectangle are 2. Okay? And then the columns, remember, go up and down. So we have one column, two columns. So we have 2 columns as well. Okay, and then for the total square tiles that we used 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4 square tiles were used. Okay, for the next rectangle, I'm going to use one color, and I'm going to show you why in a second. Okay, so there we go. So we covered up our rectangle again. So remember, rows are from side to side. So we have one row, right? And then for the number of columns, we also, we don't also, we have 1, 2, 3, right? We have 3 columns because each square here would be considered a column. So we have 3 columns. That one's a little bit tricky, so that's why I kind of wanted to redo it again so that way you can see. Okay, and then the total number of square tiles that we used to cover the rectangle was 1, 2, 3. So we also used 3 square tiles for that as well. Okay, so that was basically 11.7, was just kind of showing us how we can use little square tiles like this to cover objects and then find out how many rows there are, how many columns, and how many tiles we use all together. Okay? So then we went on to chapter 11.8, which was equal parts, and we were answering the essential question, what are halves, thirds, and fourths of a whole? So this slide was very helpful. So it says write down how many equal parts there are in the whole. Write halves, thirds, or fourths to name the equal parts. So if you remember, this is our object, and we divided it or partitioned it into 2 equal pieces. 1 piece, 2 piece. So there are 2 equal pieces here. And we called objects that are partitioned into 2 equal pieces, we called those halves, if you remember. Okay, so this object is partitioned into 2 halves. Then our next one, this object is partitioned into 1, 2, 3 equal parts. And if you remember what we call an object partitioned into 3 equal parts, we called those thirds. So this object is partitioned into 3 thirds. And then the last one we learned about was 1, 2, 3, 4. So an object partitioned into 4 equal parts. And if you remember what we call objects that are partitioned into 4 equal parts, we call those fourths. Okay, so that was pretty much what we did in chapter 11.8. The next slide is also just kind of the same thing. All right, but this one it allowed us to actually click and drag some of the things. So this object again, 1, 2, 3 equal parts. And remember, we call an object partitioned into 3 equal parts thirds. Okay. This one was also partitioned into 3 equal parts, so this is actually going to be the same answer as the first one. 3 equal parts, and we call it thirds. And then this one, 1, 2, 3, 4, so our object is partitioned up into 4 equal parts, and we call objects partitioned into 4 equal parts fourths. So it kind of, 11.8 just kind of reminded you that when you see an object cut up into a certain number of equal parts, there is a name for each one. So again, 3 equal parts is thirds, 2 equal parts is halves, and 4 equal parts is fourths. Okay? And then we went to 11.9, and 11.9 was called Show Equal Parts of a Whole, and we were answering the essential question, how do you know if a shape shows halves, thirds, or fourths? So how do we know if an object shows halves, thirds, or fourths? Well, remember what we kind of said before. This one kind of tied into 11.8, right? Halves means 2 equal parts. So there are 2 halves of a whole. Like in this picture right here, this circle is broken up or partitioned into 2 equal parts. So therefore, it is partitioned into 2 halves. So there are 2 halves in a whole. And then thirds are 3 equal parts. So in thirds, there are 3 thirds in a whole. So 1, 2, 3. Remember, they all have to be the same size, and they all have to be the same shape. Okay, just like how they are in this object, just how the circle over here has the same size and shape pieces. Okay, and then lastly, fourths are 4 equal parts. So there are 4 fourths in a whole. Okay, so any object, whether it's a square, a rectangle, a circle, there are always going to be 4 fourths in that whole. If you're breaking it up into thirds, there's going to be 3 thirds in the whole. And if you're breaking that object up into halves, there's going to be 2 halves in that whole. Okay? So this one says draw to show equal parts. So this one was one that I didn't get to do because I didn't update my Smart Notebook, but now I do have the updated Smart Notebook, so now I can actually show you how to do that. So to draw equal parts, so remember halves, we're making 2 equal pieces. So for halves, I can literally just draw one line right down the center of that object. I'm going to move it over a little bit so that way it looks a little bit more equal. Okay, and you could do it either way. You could draw a line going straight down. You can also draw a line going right across. That would also show halves. Okay, but to show halves, we can just use one line just going straight down to make 2 equal pieces. Now fourths, what we can do, there's a bunch of different ways, and I'm going to show you a couple. Okay, so one way you can do it is, again, you can make a T. So you draw one straight line going down, and then you draw one straight line going across. Okay, so there are our fourths for that one. Now, if you wanted to do another way, which we actually talk about a lot in 11.11, but we'll get to that in a second, another way you can make fourths is you can draw an X in this rectangle. So going from corner to corner, and now you have fourths. So you have 4 kind of equal pieces. Okay? All right. And then for thirds, what you can do is you can make lines going like this. So again, always trying to make the pieces equal. All right, and I'll move my lines over just a little bit so that way they're a little bit more equal. Just like that. That one over a little bit. Okay, and so that's how you can show equal parts. All right, so good job. And then we went to 11.10, and 11.10 was describe equal parts. So how do you find a half of, a third of, or a fourth of a whole was our essential question. And so this one talked a lot about, again, not only breaking the object up into halves, thirds, or fourths, but then deciding how do we find just 1/2 or 1/3 or 1/4 of the shape. Okay, and so in this example, these are some ways to show and describe an equal part of a whole. So remember, two equal parts. So this rectangle is divided up or partitioned into two equal pieces or halves, right? And then 1/2 is colored green and 1/2 is white. So we would say a half of the shape is green. 1/2 of the shape or the whole is green. You could also say 1/2 of the shape is white. That would also be true. Okay? And then for thirds, remember 3 equal parts are thirds. So this object is broken up into 3 equal parts. And then one of those equal parts is green. So we would say a third of the shape is green, right? 1/3 of the shape is green. You could also say 2/3, 1, 2, 2/3 of the shape are white. And then lastly, 4 equal parts. All right, so again, this object is partitioned into 4 equal parts. One of them is green, so we would say a fourth of the shape is green. You could also say 3/4 of the shape are white. That would also be true. So just remember that if you see one part that's shaded in any color, right, it's always going to be 1/4 or 1/3 or 1/2. Okay, so that's just kind of showing you, like, that's how you know if an object is showing a half, a third, or a fourth. Okay. All right, and then so this one was also part of the same chapter, and it said draw to show halves and color halves. So this is another one that I wasn't able to do for you when I was first teaching it, but now I can. So again, we're trying to show halves and we're going to color a half. So I'm going to divide this object into halves. I'll make that line a little bit better. Okay, so I made that into halves, and then it says color a half. So what I'm going to do is I am going to color a half. Now, am I going to color one of the equal pieces, or am I going to color both of the equal pieces? So it says color a half, which means 1/2. So I am going to color just one of the equal pieces. Okay? So I'm just going to do that. It's not going to be perfect, but I'm going to do my best. Okay. All right. So I'll stop it there. And so then something that I could say is 1/2 of the circle is blue. I could also say 1/2 of the circle is white. Both of those would be true. Okay. Now this one, it says thirds. So I'm going to draw to show thirds, and then I'm going to color a third or 1/3. So first I'm going to make my thirds. I'm going to go this way. Try and finish that line there. Okay. So now I have my 3 equal pieces, and so now I'm going to color a third. So I'm going to color 1/3. So I'm going to color just one of those equal pieces. And I'm going to do it trying to stay inside the lines. Okay, I think that's good enough. So now for this one, I could say 1/3 of the rectangle is green. I could also say 2/3 of the rectangle are white. Again, both would be true. But right for this one, I was just asked to color a third. So I colored a third. I colored 1/3. All right, and then this last one, it says it says draw to show fourths and color a fourth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my fourths. Okay, and then I'm going to color a fourth. So I'm going to color one of the 4 equal pieces that I made. Okay, so that's good enough. And then what I can say for this one is that 1/4 of the object is red. I could also say 3/4 of the object are white. But in this case, it asked me to color a fourth. So 1/4 of the object is red. Okay? So that was pretty much 11.10. And then our last chapter, 11.11, was called Equal Shares. And we were answering the essential question, how can drawing a diagram help when solving problems about equal shares? So this one gave you some word problems. Okay, and so this was just one example of a word problem that dealt with equal shares. So it says, draw to show your answer. Roger has 2 square sheets of paper that are the same size. He wants to cut each sheet into halves. What are 2 different ways he can cut the sheets of paper? So remember, this one too, this chapter, we learned a lot about asking ourselves 2 important questions. What do I need to find? And what information do I need to use, right? So in this case, what do I need to find? We need to find 2 different ways that Roger can cut the sheets of paper, right? And what information do I need to use? Well, we can use the information that 1, both sheets of paper are the same size, and 2, he wants to cut each sheet into halves. So cutting it into halves means cutting it into 2 equal pieces, right? So basically what we need to do is we need to find 2 different ways to cut these 2 sheets of paper into halves. Okay, so if you remember from the beginning of this video and from the beginning chapters, we can cut halves like this by going straight down the middle. And then we can also go left to right, just like that. Another way that you can do it too is by taking one diagonal line and going from corner to corner. That would also make halves. That would make 2 equal sized triangles. Okay, but I'm just going to do it for this one. So, and that was pretty much all you had to do. You just had to show 2 different ways he can cut the sheets of paper. So if you see a question on your review, or if you see a question on like your homework, and it asks you, what are 2 ways to cut a square into halves, both of these would be correct because they are still showing 2 equal pieces. They may not be showing the same 2 equal pieces, but they are showing 2 equal pieces or 2 halves. Okay, so that was really just 11.11, and that's what they wanted you to do for that one. Okay, always remember to ask yourselves these questions when it comes to word problems, especially when you're dealing with like equal shares and fractions and stuff like that. What do I need to find? What is the problem asking me to find? And then what information do I need to use? What info from the problem can I use to help me solve for the answer? Okay, and that was pretty much chapters 11.7 to 11.11. You guys did an amazing job going through all these chapters every week, and I know it was especially hard because we're now doing all this online, but you guys did a really great job with this math unit, and I can't wait to start the next one with you guys. So at the end of this video, what you can do is you can log on to Think Central, and I assigned for you something that is called Chapter 11 Review, and feel free to please get through all those questions and do that review. It's not a test, so you don't have to feel like it's a test and it's going to hurt your math grade or anything like that. It's just a review. It's just to kind of put everything together and kind of finish up our unit on partitioning objects and fractions. Okay, so don't feel like if you don't get the grade you were hoping for, that it's going to affect your school grade, because it's not. It's just a review to kind of finish up this unit on chapters 11.7 to 11.11. Okay, so good luck with that, and again, give yourselves a pat on the back for getting through all those chapters. We are officially done with our first unit on our distance learning plan, so great job, everybody, and can't wait to see all of your scores on the review, because I know you guys are all going to do great. All right, thank you so much. Good job.